God cannot save you from them. Those trembling prayers never reach heaven, they are crushed by the sound of war drums. The roar of savage waves and the screams of the men from the north. Do not call them barbarians. That word is too weak, too gentle. They are not mindless beasts. They're cold-blooded hunters, warriors forged from ice, carrying in their hearts a fire of war that never dies. They move like colossal sharks, sniffing the scent of blood and the decay of an entire continent from thousands of miles away. While Europe slumbered in an illusion of peace, they watched. While kings were engrossed in disputes over thrones, they waited. And fragile faith appeared. They saw it as a feast that fate had prepared for them. When the dragon ships parted the waves, it was not just a redit, it was a death sentence. The beasts' carved prows snarled as if heralding the apocalypse. The mere rumor of their arrival was enough to make entire villages and towns tremble and flee, for fear was their first and most effective weapon. Their principles were as simple as the fall of an axe blade. The weak do not deserve to live. Mercy exists only when it serves domination. The gold of God, the gold of kings, or the gold of anyone will end up in their hands. They were not just pirates. They were the architects of fear, the ones who turned slaughter into an art, war into a precise formula, and all of Europe into a chessboard for their conquest. This is not an adventure story. This is a testimony to a living nightmare, about a small people who used violence and intellect to hack the entire political, economic, and religious system of a continent. The blood of the past has not yet dried, and their terrifying legacy still haunts us to this day. Click subscribe now if you dare to throw open that door and look directly into the icy eyes of those who rewrote history with blood. Shadows from the north, the roots of rage. In this opening part, we stand amidst the still warm ashes of Lindisfarne Monastery, a sanctuary that was once a symbol of faith and civilization. Alcuin, the brilliant scholar from York, wrote in absolute horror, yes, as if his very soul had been torn apart. Never before has such a terror appeared in Britain. The Church of St. Cuthbert is spattered with the blood of the priests of God. Despoiled of all its ornaments, its treasures accumulated over centuries, the dragon-headed ships, with wooden eyes as red as fresh blood, silently vanished into the mist, leaving behind a Europe trembling with an unprecedented fear. This was not just a raid. It was a historical moment that marked the rise of a new power, a storm from the north that would bring an entire continent to its knees. They came like ghosts from the abyss, but they were not demons or monsters from legend. They were human, people forged from a harsh land where life was not given freely, but had to be torn from the hands of ice, storms, and the fierce sea. Tonight, we will delve into the roots of that rage, exploring the factors that shaped the Viking warriors, those who made an entire continent change its view of the world. We will meet a people who carried the spirit of fire and ice within them, driven by ambition, technology, and an unshakable faith. Let us journey back in time, to 8th century Scandinavia. A remote land in the far north of Europe where history seemed to have been forgotten. Forget the image of a prosperous Europe with vast wheat fields and green vineyards under the Mediterranean sun. Instead, imagine a world of ice and volcanic fire where winter dragged on like an endless curse, with nights so long that people had to fight to keep the last embers of warmth alive. The sea here was not a friend, but a roaring monster at their doorstep, with waves as high as mountains and storms that could swallow an entire fleet. But the story of the Vikings is not simply that barren lands pushed them to sea in search of wealth. The reality is far more complex. In the late 8th century, an unusual warming period, which historians call the medieval warm period, changed everything. The temperature rose by a few degrees, enough to melt the ice in higher regions, allowing agriculture to flourish like never before. Fields of barley and oats began to thrive, leading to a sudden population boom. Suddenly, the small, already crowded plots of land were no longer enough to feed everyone. The pressure on land became intense, turning peaceful villages into cauldrons of competition for survival. Large families had to find other ways to live, and the sea, though dangerous, became the only path. Their society was also a crucible of fierce competition, built on the foundations of strength and fame. Viking society was clearly divided into three main classes, each reflecting the harshness of life. Jarls, powerful chieftains, petty kings who ruled vast lands, possessing great wealth, slaves, and power. They lived in large wooden halls with lavish feasts and heroic tales told by wandering poets. To maintain power, they had to constantly prove their strength through warfare and generosity. Carls, the most numerous and versatile class, including farmers tilling rocky soil, craftsmen forging weapons and jewelry, merchants sailing to distant lands, and, most importantly, free warriors. A Carl was not bound by fate. He could always rise through feats of arms, becoming a Jarl if he was brave and lucky enough. They were the backbone of Viking society, the men who took their axes to sea in search of glory. Thralls. The lowest class, usually prisoners of war from raids or people who could not pay their debts. They had no freedom and were forced into hard labor on farms or ships, but could sometimes buy their freedom if they were fortunate. In a society fragmented into countless small kingdoms, the Jarls constantly vied for power through tribal wars. To attract and retain loyal Carl warriors, a Jarl had to prove he was the most generous. He had to bestow abundant wealth, gold, silver, weapons, and even slaves. But that wealth was not found in barren Scandinavia. It lay across the sea, in the rich but poorly defended monasteries and cities of Christian Europe. Places like Lindisfarne, with their centuries-old treasures, became ideal targets. Furthermore, strict inheritance laws and the practice of polygamy among the nobility created a large army of younger sons. Young, strong, ambitious men with no land to inherit under the tradition of primogeniture. They did not want to live as poor farmers. For them, the only path to gain fame, wealth, and social status was to set sail and join a raid, an act known as going a Viking. This wasn't just robbery, it was a rite of passage, a way to prove oneself in a society that glorified strength and courage. Ambition needs a tool to be realized, and the Vikings created a technological masterpiece that completely changed the rules of warfare and exploration: the longship. This was not an ordinary vessel. It was a strategic weapon of attack, a symbol of terror and invincible power. Crafted from durable oak from ancient forests, these ships could carry up to 60 to 100 warriors, along with their weapons and loot, on voyages lasting for months. What made the longship so special, so superior to contemporary European ships? Clinker-built hull. Oak planks were skillfully overlapped, fastened with iron rivets and pine tar, creating a hull that was both incredibly sturdy to withstand violent storms and flexible enough to bend with the waves instead of fighting them. This design allowed the ship to glide over high seas without breaking, an engineering feat that Europe would not match for centuries. Shallow draft. This was their true superpower, the shallow hull of only about 1 meter and a flat bottom. These ships could do the unthinkable: cross the ferocious North Sea with its giant waves, then penetrate deep inland through shallow rivers. They could appear unexpectedly before the gates of Paris on the Seine or York on the Humber, attacking places where no one expected a seaborne raid. This turned Europe's entire river system into a highway network for the Vikings. Speed and agility. With a large square sail made of wool or linen, combined with dozens of synchronized oars, the longship could reach speeds of up to 15 knots in favorable conditions, allowing them to execute lightning-fast attacks and retreat before local forces could react. Its symmetrical design allowed the ship to change direction quickly without turning around, ideal for guerrilla warfare. Psychological weapon. The intricately carved dragon or sea serpent head on the prow was not just for decoration, but to instill terror in the hearts of their enemies. According to Viking belief, it could ward off evil spirits and protect the ship from storms. When people in Europe saw those red eyes from a distance, they often panicked, believing that demons were coming. The longship turned the sea from a deadly barrier into a highway of freedom, and transformed the entire coastline and river systems of Europe into a vast, borderless battlefield. It was not just a tool, it was a symbol of Viking freedom and power. The Viking worldview was shaped by gods who reflected the very harshness of the Scandinavian landscape, a world where strength and survival were the ultimate values. Odin, not a benevolent king like Zeus or Jupiter, but a god of berserker rage, bloody sacrifice, and cunning deception. He was a wanderer, a poet, sorcerer, who craved knowledge and power at any cost, even hanging himself from the Yggdrasil tree for 9 days to learn the runes. Odin did not bless peace. He incited war to select the greatest warrior souls for Valhalla, Thor, the protector of mankind, a great warrior with his legendary hammer Mjolnir, symbol of strength and destruction for the enemies of gods and men. Thor represented brute force, defending against chaotic forces like Jormungandr, the giant sea serpent. But what truly turned the Vikings into fearless warriors was their belief in the afterlife. A belief system that made death a desirable goal. Valhalla, and if you fell on the battlefield with a weapon in your hand, your soul would be chosen by the Valkyries. Beautiful but fearsome warrior maidens off would go to Valhalla, Odin's golden hall in Asgard, where you would live an eternal life of battle by day and feasting by night, eating divine boar and drinking endless mead. The other half would go to the field of the goddess Freya, also filled with fighting and pleasure. All of this was in preparation for Ragnarok, the end of days, when gods and warriors would fight against the final chaos. Hell, in contrast, a death from sickness, old age, or on a bed of straw, would send your soul to the cold realm of hell. A world of shadows, oblivion, and endless sorrow, ruled by the goddess Hel, Loki's daughter. This belief changed everything. It transformed humanity's greatest fear, death, into a desirable goal, encouraging ultimate bravery. Added to this was the concept of word, the belief that each person's life, including the day of their death, was predetermined by the Norns. 3 goddesses who wove the threads of destiny. If you couldn't change your fate, why not face it with ultimate courage, turning every battle into a chance for immortal glory? When these men appeared on the coasts of Europe, they were the embodiment of a living nightmare. Dispel the image of horned helmets, product of 19th century romantic imagination based on opera paintings. A real Viking warrior looked far more terrifying, combining raw power with refined discipline. Weapons, battle axe, the iconic weapon, cheap and versatile, with devastating power. Especially the long-handled Danish axe, with a broad blade that could split a wooden shield or decapitate a horse in a single swing. It was crafted from forged iron, often decorated with protective runes. Sword, a symbol of high status. Swords like the legendary Ulfberth, forged from high-quality steel imported from the Middle East, were precious assets, given names and passed down through generations. Round shield, made of lightweight linden wood, covered in leather and rimmed with iron. It was not just for defense, its edge was also used for attack. They used shields to form their famous battle formation, the shield wall. This was a highly disciplined formation where warriors stood close together, overlapping their shields to create a nearly impenetrable mobile fortress, leaving only gaps for spears and axes to strike out. Appearance: they were tall, powerfully built men with carefully tended hair and beards, often braided with leather cords or silver rings. They were not dirty savages. On the contrary, they bathed regularly, used combs and soap made from animal fat, and took pride in their imposing appearance. Runic tattoos on their bodies added to their mysterious and frightening aura. They did not come to negotiate or beg. They came to take everything, with blood, fire, and sharp steel. Every raid was a hymn to strength, where death was not failure, but the path to Valhalla. Do you believe that a faith in a warrior's paradise, where death is immortal glory, could make people willing to create hell on earth for others? Leave your thoughts in the comments. A like and a subscribe will be the flame that shows you're ready to delve deeper into the roots of this rage. In the next part, we will see them in action, when the shield wall is raised, and the axe falls, and when all of Europe trembles before the Vikings storm from the north. the opening flame, Lindisfarne, 793, and the eruption of the nightmare. In the previous part, we set foot on the land of ice and fire, where Viking warriors were born from the harshness of nature, a fiercely competitive society, and a belief in immortal glory in Valhalla. When we saw their silhouette, a people carrying the spirit of the sea and fire, led by war-loving gods like Odin and Thor, ready to unleash terror upon the Christian world. That was the legend, the theoretical foundation. But on a fateful summer morning in the year 793, that legend became a bloody reality, like an axe blow cleaving the destiny of an entire continent. Tonight, we will not just recount a single raid. We will reenact a profound sacrilege, a moment that tore apart the veil of security of an entire Christian civilization. This is the moment that made all of Europe tremble, that made prayers more desperate than ever, and that turned the most sacred churches from safe havens into targets of destruction. Join me, not with a fantastical time machine, but with your own mind and imagination, as we return to the holy island of Lindisfarne, off the coast of ancient Northumbria in England. Close your eyes and feel the fragile peace of the morning of June 8th, 793, a day that would forever change history. Imagine a small, beautiful island surrounded by a deep blue sea, where the waves gently lap the shore like a natural lullaby, mixed with the cries of seagulls. On the island, an ancient stone monastery has stood since the 7th century. With thick, moss-covered walls and stained-glass windows sparkling in the early morning sun, reflecting images of saints and biblical stories, this was not just an ordinary monastery. It was the heart of Christian knowledge and faith in the north, a beacon of civilization in a world full of post-Roman darkness. For centuries, Lindisfarne was where monks, profound scholars, talented artists, keepers of God's light, dedicated their entire lives to preserving and creating knowledge. They were not warriors with swords and spears, they were humble men in white robes, living in silence, bowing their heads over holy texts and praying for hours. Imagine an elderly monk, his hands trembling with age and cold, sitting in a dark stone room, lit only by a flickering beeswax candle. He carefully draws each delicate Latin letter, each intricate Celtic pattern on precious vellum, using shimmering gold leaf and vibrant pigments brought from distant lands like Egypt or India through trade routes. Think of the Lindisfarne Gospels, a masterpiece of medieval art created right here by the monk Edfrith. Each page is a living prayer, each stroke a profound declaration of faith, combining Celtic spiral motifs with Christian imagery. These scriptures were not just books. They were symbols of purity, of a fragile beauty trying to survive in a world full of violence, chaos, and disease. Lindisfarne was not just an island, it was a sanctuary, regarded by all of Christian Europe as a place protected by God himself. No Christian king, no matter how brutal like the Anglo-Saxon lords, dared to lay a hand on its sanctity. It was a symbol of hope, of the light of faith, of cosmic order in a dark age. And that is why, when the first lookouts, perhaps a young monk praying by the shore, saw dark shapes appear on the horizon that fateful morning, they did not immediately feel fear. They saw long, slender ships with red and white striped sails billowing in the sea breeze. Merchants from afar, they probably thought, with a mix of curiosity and Christian hospitality. Traders of fur, salt, or perhaps slaves from strange lands, coming to exchange goods as they had many times before. But then the ships drew closer, terrifyingly fast. The morning sun glinted off their prows, and they saw them. Dragon heads intricately carved from oak, bearing sharp fangs and claws like sea monsters rising from the ocean's depths. Their wooden eyes burned red, as if ablaze with a thirst for destruction and fresh blood. And on the decks were the figures we mentioned in the previous part. Tall Viking warriors with tangled beards, their blonde or red hair intricately braided with silver rings. Their eyes were as cold as the Scandinavian ice, but their hearts burned like volcanic fire. In their hands were massive battle axes, their steel blades gleaming in the sun, ready to drink blood and split flesh and bone. The attack on Lindisfarne was not a fair battle between two sides. It was a brutal massacre, a storm of fire and blood that swept across the island like a curse from hell on earth. With just a few dozen warriors from 3 or 4 ships, the Vikings turned a sanctuary into a hellscape within hours. Why Lindisfarne? Why a small monastery on a remote island, home only to monks and holy books, and not a major city or military fortress? The answer lies in the violent collision of 2 completely opposite worldviews, a profound cultural and religious clash. To medieval Europeans, a monastery like Lindisfarne was God's house, an inviolable place protected by divine power and the curse of the church. It was where the treasures of the faith were kept. Crosses studded with pearls and gold, silver-bound Bibles, and the relics of saints like St. Cuthbert, symbols of holiness, of a cosmic order under God's protection. No one dared touch it, for to do so was to challenge God himself and invite eternal damnation. But to the Vikings who worshipped Odin, Thor, and the Norse gods, Lindisfarne was not a sacred sanctuary. It was simply an undefended treasure trove, an easy target overflowing with gold, silver, and potential slaves. The golden crosses, the silver-bound books, the glittering gems, they were all just valuable loot. A reward for those who dared to cross the sea and raise their axes. More importantly, the monastery had almost no defense. The monks, whose hands were more accustomed to holding quills than iron swords, had no armor, no weapons, and no combat experience. They were gentle sheep before the sharp teeth of the wolves from the north who knew nothing of Christ and feared no curse from the church. The attack was as swift as an inescapable nightmare. The dragon-headed ships slid onto the island's soft sandy beach. The Viking warriors leaped ashore with terrifying speed, sound of their leather boots on the coast like the drumbeat of war and destiny. They spoke no words, no declaration of war or threat to give the enemy a chance to surrender. There was only the sound of axes swinging through the air, the clang of shields, and the horrified screams of the monks as steel blades sank deep into soft flesh. They beheaded those who fled along the beach, staining the white sand red. They dragged monks from the altar where they were kneeling in prayer, hoping for God's intervention, and killed them right there, blood pooling on the sacred stones that had once been consecrated. Precious Bibles, like the Lindisfarne Gospels, were brutally torn apart, their delicate vellum pages thrown into the fire or trampled underfoot. Golden crosses were ripped from the walls, tossed into leather sacks, along with silver cups, pearl necklaces, and even the surviving monks, who were captured as slaves. The relics of St. Cuthbert, Lindisfarne's patron saint, were contemptuously thrown into the sea, a final challenge to the Christian God, an act of sacrilege that sent shudders through all of Europe. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, one of the most important historical documents of ancient England, recorded this event with unconcealed horror, as if the very heavens were weeping. This year, dire portents came over the land of Northumbria and miserably frightened the people. These were immense flashes of lightning, and fiery dragons were seen flying in the air. A great famine soon followed these signs, and a little after that, on the 8th of June, the ravaging of heathen men miserably destroyed God's church in Lindisfarne through rapine and slaughter. This act was not just ordinary plunder, it was a profound blasphemy, a punch straight to the heart of Christian European civilization. Killing monks at the altar, throwing relics into the sea, burning holy books. These were actions aimed not just at people, but at their very faith, challenging the existence of Christ. For Europeans of that time, this was more terrifying than physical death. It was a declaration that nothing was sacred, nowhere was safe, and no god could protect them from the fury of the Northmen. News of Lindisfarne spread across Europe like wildfire, swift and unstoppable, through traveling monks, merchants, and messengers. Alcuin, the English scholar working at the court of the great Charlemagne in Alcuin, wrote a grief-stricken letter back home, as if his own soul had been pierced. We and our fathers have now lived in this fair land for nearly 350 years, and never before has such a terror appeared in Britain as we have now suffered from a pagan race, nor was it thought that such an inroad from the sea could be made. Behold, the church of St. Cuthbert spattered with the blood of the priests of God, despoiled of all its ornaments. The shock was not just in the brutality of the massacre. It was in the complete helplessness of the Christian world. If even Lindisfarne, a sanctuary protected by God, could be violated so easily, where else in the world was safe? This fear planted a deep seed of doubt in the hearts of Europeans. It's not just about their military strength, but about their faith itself. Did God truly protect his flock? From that fear, a prayer was born, a prayer that would echo in churches across Europe for centuries, becoming a symbol of the Viking terror. A furor, Normanorum, Libra, Nos, Domini. Deliver us, O Lord, from the fury of the Northmen. Lindisfarne was not the largest raid in Viking history. There would be much larger sieges of Paris or Constantinople later on. But it was the most important, the opening flame that ignited a new era, the Viking Age. Lasting from 793 to 1066, it sent a cold, uncompromising message to all of Europe. A new power, ruthless and unbound by any Christian rules, had risen from the sea. No coast, no church, no village was safe anymore. This was the beginning of a nightmare that would spread, changing the map of Europe forever. Put yourself in the shoes of a European farmer at that time. You live in a world defined by clear rules. The king protects you with his army. The church shields your soul with prayer, and God guides everything with divine justice. But then an enemy appears. An enemy who fears no king, reveres no God, and seems to follow no rules of the civilized world, making no distinction between sanctuary and commoner. What do you think is more frightening? An enemy who attacks you for land, for gold, or for power? Reasons you can understand and negotiate? Or an enemy who attacks you for seemingly no reason other than pure brutality? A desire to turn your world into ash and blood? That is a primal fear, one that forces an entire continent to change. Leave your thoughts in the comments. A like and a subscribe will be a small flame, showing that you are delving into this story with me. They succeeded spectacularly at Lindisfarne. But how? How could their ships cross ferocious seas, strike like lightning and vanish like ghosts? It was thanks to an engineering marvel, the dragon ships. In the next part, we will not talk about the Viking warriors. We'll talk about their secret weapon, the dragon ships, the war machines that took them from icy fjords to the heart of Europe, turning the sea into their playground. The secret of the dragon ships and 3 unbeatable weapons. In the previous part, we stood amidst the ruins of Lindisfarne Monastery, where the fire of the Vikings scorched the peace of an entire continent, opening the Viking Age. We witnessed a profound cultural shock, sacrilege that made Europe tremble and turned prayers into desperate cries for salvation from the fury of the North. But after that fire, a question still hangs in the air, sharp as a Danish axe. How? How could bands of raiders from the icy lands of the North, with numbers far smaller than European armies, attack like lightning, sweep through everything, and vanish like ghosts in the mist? Why were the powerful kingdoms of Europe, with their large armies, heavily armored knights, and fortified castles, so helpless against these heathens for centuries? The answer doesn't lie in a single factor. It was a perfect combination, a perfect storm created from 3 unbeatable pillars: superior technology, cunning tactics, and a terrifying psychological warfare. These 3 secret weapons turned the Vikings into the nightmare of an era, allowing them to dominate the seas and rivers from 793 to 1066. Tonight, we will dissect each weapon, each steel blade in their war machine, to understand why they were so successful. Let's start with the first weapon, an engineering marvel that stunned the world: the longship, also known as the dragon ship. Imagine you are standing on a cold Norwegian shore, thick fog obscuring the horizon like a secret veil. From within that mist, a shape emerges, a long, slender, yet sturdy ship, with a prow carved in the shape of a dragon's head, its wooden eyes glowing red like fresh blood, as if the sea serpent Jarmungandr from Norse mythology itself were rising from the ocean's depths. This was not just a ship. It was a medieval engineering masterpiece, a war machine designed with deadly precision, perfectly suited for conquest and destruction. The Viking longship was a technological wonder, 20 to 35 meters long, only 5 meters wide to increase speed, and perfectly symmetrical for easy maneuvering. It was built to glide through the fierce waves of the North Sea at terrifying speeds, up to 15 to 20 knots in favorable winds. The symmetrical design allowed it to reverse direction quickly without turning, like a water snake slithering through currents. It was equipped with both oars and a large square sail made of hand-woven wool, allowing it to move swiftly, regardless of weather conditions, strong winds or calm. But its true secret lay in its sophisticated construction. The hull was made of strong oak, yet light enough to be rowed by a few dozen men without exhaustion. The ship's draft was astonishingly shallow, only about 1 meter, allowing it to sail into the smallest rivers of Europe, places where no heavy European ship of the time dared to go. It was sturdy enough to withstand the violent storms of the ocean, with a flexible hull that bent with the waves, yet agile enough to penetrate deep into the enemy's heartland without running aground. Do you see the enormous strategic advantage? While European ships, heavy, cumbersome, with deep drafts and only able to dock at major ports, were limited by coastal geography. The Viking longships were free-roaming water dragons, unbound by any limits. They could cross the vast ocean, navigating waves as high as mountains in the North Sea, and then, like unexpected ghosts, they could sail up the Seine to attack the heart of Paris, down the Thames to spread terror in London, or even be carried overland to traverse the Volga River in Russia. They appeared in places where no one thought a seagoing vessel could reach: remote riverside villages, peaceful island monasteries, and seemingly impregnable cities like York or Seville. These ships were not just means of transport. They were symbols of freedom, ruthlessness, and unstoppable power. Each dragon-headed prow was a psychological declaration of war, promise of blood and fire that made the enemy panic even before the battle began. Modern archaeological finds, such as those at Oseberg and Gokstad, show that these ships were even buried with chieftains as grave goods, demonstrating their immense importance in Viking culture. The longship gave the Vikings superior mobility. It was their tactics that turned these ships into deadly weapons, forming the second pillar: cunning guerrilla warfare. The Vikings did not fight like contemporary European armies, with large head-on prolonged battles. They did not seek long-term territorial conquest from the outset. Instead, they were masters of guerrilla warfare, phantoms of the battlefield, employing a ruthless, effective, and almost unstoppable hit-and-run strategy. Imagine you are an Anglo-Saxon lord in the 9th century. To assemble an army, you need to send messengers on horseback to distant fiefdoms, summon local knights, prepare war horses, armor, and supplies. A process that could take weeks, even months, given the poor roads and harsh weather. But the Vikings didn't give you that time. They exploited the very sluggishness of the European feudal system. They appeared from nowhere, like demons rising from the sea or rivers. One morning, as the sun just rose and mist still lingered, dragon ships would approach a coastal village or an undefended monastery. They attacked with a speed and brutality that left the enemy no time to react. The shield wall formed. Axes fell. Blood flowed like rivers, and gold, silver, and slaves were loaded onto the ships within hours. And then, before the local army could even receive the news via messenger, before a sword could be drawn from its scabbard, they were back on their ships and gone, vanishing into the mist or down the river, leaving behind only billowing smoke, echoing cries, and strewn corpses. They did not fight to seize land or build an empire immediately. They fought to plunder, to spread pervasive fear, and to assert their power through the heroic tales that would be told. Their tactics were optimized for chaos. They chose weak targets like monasteries or villages, avoided direct confrontation with large armies, and used the river and sea terrain for rapid withdrawal. Nowhere was safe. From the remote Scottish Isles to the prosperous cities of France, this strategy was not only militarily effective, but also economically efficient, as each raid brought back enormous wealth to sustain Viking society. But the greatest, most terrifying weapon of the Vikings was not the longship or guerrilla tactics. It lay deep within their minds and souls, an unquenchable fire, a belief that turned them into invincible war machines. This was the third pillar, the berserker mentality, the fire that burned in the veins of the Vikings. We have talked about Valhalla, the warrior's paradise, where death on the battlefield was not a tragic end, but a gateway to eternal glory. With endless feasting and fighting alongside Odin, this belief eradicated humanity's greatest fear, the fear of death. The Vikings did not fight to survive safely. They fought to die gloriously, to be carried by the Valkyries to Odin's golden hall. They would eat, drink, fight, and laugh with their battle brothers until Ragnarok, the final battle against chaos. Among them were special warriors known as berserkers or Elfednir, those who embodied a divine fury. It was said that before battle, they would enter a state of battle frenzy, as if their souls were possessed by the gods themselves or animal spirits. They would cast off their armor, revealing muscular bodies covered in protective runic tattoos, and consume a type of mushroom or alcohol to induce hallucinations and enhance their strength. They growled like wild bears or wolves. Their eyes burned red like hellfire, and they charged into enemy ranks with a massive battle axe without a hint of fear or hesitation. They felt no pain from their wounds, felt no fear of death, felt only rage, a fire that consumed everything in their path, enabling them to fight alone against dozens of enemies. European chronicles describe them as inhuman monsters, biting their shields and roaring before battle. Imagine you are an Anglo-Saxon soldier, standing in a trembling shield line, your hand gripping a cold spear. Before you, from the mist, a berserker appears, a giant of a man nearly 2 meters tall. Without armor, his hair wild, roaring like a savage beast. His axe swings, splitting a shield as if it were a dry, brittle twig. His eyes lock onto yours, and in that moment, you are not just facing a man, you're facing a storm, an embodiment of divine warfare, a ghost from Valhalla. This was the psychological weapon of the Vikings, their very presence, their boundless brutality designed to break the enemy's will to fight before the first axe blade even touched flesh. An army might be strong in numbers, but when faced with warriors who did not fear death, did not feel pain, and seemed not to belong to this mortal world, even the bravest soldiers would falter, flee, or surrender. The longship brought them to every corner of Europe. Guerrilla tactics left their enemies no time to react, and the berserker mentality turned them into living nightmares. Figures that made an entire continent pray for God to deliver them from the fury of the Northmen. Let's pause for a moment and reflect. In a war, what factor truly determines victory? Is it superior technology, like longships that can conquer both oceans and rivers? Is it clever tactics, like guerrilla warfare, that keeps the enemy off balance? Or is it an indomitable spirit, a belief in a glory greater than life itself, turning every warrior into an unstoppable storm? Or is it the combination of all three that creates unbeatable strength? Leave your thoughts in the comments. A like and a subscribe will be a small flame, showing that you are delving into the secrets of the Vikings with me. With these three weapons in hand, the Vikings did not stop at Lindisfarne. They turned all of Europe into a war chessboard, where they were the unstoppable predators. In the next part, we will witness that nightmare spread. From the shores of England to the rich cities of France, from small villages to great capitals, the fury of the Northmen knew no bounds, and their story has only just begun. When the nightmare spread from Lindisfarne to all of Europe. In the previous part, we stood in an ancient shipyard where dragon ships were born from wood and iron, and on a training ground where berserkers roared like wild beasts. We explored the three perfect weapons of the Vikings: the longship, a war machine that could conquer both oceans and rivers; guerrilla tactics, which left enemies no time to react; and the berserker mentality, which turned them into fearless, pain-immune nightmares. With these three weapons in hand, the Vikings did not stop at the small fire of Lindisfarne. Lindisfarne was just a matchstick, a first spark compared to the firestorm they were about to unleash upon all of Europe. The continent, with its proud kingdoms like the Anglo-Saxons, the Franks, and the Byzantines, its wealthy cities full of gold and silver, and its sacred churches filled with treasures, was just a dry field ready to burn under the axe and flame of the Northmen. Tonight, we will unfold a map. Not a regular geographical map, but a map of destruction and conquest. Let's follow the trail of the dragon ships. From the icy shores of Scandinavia to the splendid cities of the Mediterranean. From the vast Russian rivers to the remote islands of the North Atlantic, this is the story of a nightmare that spread, unbound by land, sea, or religious faith, changing the history of Europe forever. After Lindisfarne in 793, the islands of Britain became the first and most frequent playground for the Vikings. They didn't just stop at remote monasteries like Jarrow or Iona, where they continued to plunder Christian treasures. They turned to Ireland, a richer island, with ancient Celtic monasteries filled with gold and holy books, but less protected due to political fragmentation. Gold-bound Bibles, pearl-encrusted crosses, and the sacred relics of Irish saints all became valuable loot, brought back to Scandinavia to be distributed or traded. But the Vikings didn't just come to raid and leave like common pirates. In Ireland, they began to stay for longer periods, building long forts, fortified settlements by rivers with high wooden walls, moats, and harbors. These long forts were not just raiding bases, but also trading centers, where they exchanged slaves, furs, and silver with local tribes. One of these long forts, initially just a small wooden camp by the River Liffey, grew over time to become the city we now call Dublin, the vibrant capital of Ireland, which still bears Viking imprints in its architecture and street names. The nightmare didn't just come and go, began to build a home, digging deep into the heart of Europe, turning invaders into residents. But Britain and Ireland were just the first steps, the nearby targets. The greedy eyes of the Vikings soon turned to a larger, richer, and more challenging prize: the kingdom of the Franks, the land that is now France and Germany, with its prosperous cities and royal treasuries, and their secret weapon, the flexible, shallow draft longships, opened a water highway, leading straight into the center of this mighty kingdom. The great rivers like the Seine, Rhine, and Loire. Imagine you are an ordinary French farmer living by the river Seine on a peaceful morning in 845. The sun has just risen, and still lingers on the sparkling water, and you are checking your fishing nets or plowing your field as usual. Suddenly, from the downstream horizon, a dark shape appears. Not one ship, not two, but a massive fleet of over 120 dragon ships, silently sailing upstream with synchronized oars, like a pack of water wolves hunting in deadly silence. The dragon-carved prows bare their teeth, their wooden eyes glowing red like hellfire. On the decks, Viking warriors stand silently, gripping axes and shields, their eyes as cold as ice, but full of desire for loot. This was not an ordinary army. It was a prophecy of the apocalypse, rising from the water, a place from which no one expected an invasion. They didn't need to destroy bridges or bypass fortified coastal forts. The longships glided effortlessly up the shallow river, like blades cutting deep into the flesh of the Frankish kingdom. They went straight to Paris, the splendid capital of the Franks, with its early Gothic churches and royal palace, where the weak city walls were not designed to defend against an enemy coming from the river instead of the land. The siege of Paris in 845 was one of the most terrifying and iconic moments of the Viking Age. Under the leadership of a legendary chieftain, possibly Ragnar Lothbrok, a name that has become legendary in Norse sagas and on modern screens like the Vikings series. The Vikings camped just outside the city, on what is now the Isle de la. Their campfires burned brightly in the dark night, like the eyes of demons watching. The sound of sharpening axes echoed, mixed with wild laughter and war songs in Old Norse, as if they were not just preparing for an attack but already celebrating a victory yet to come. King Charles, the bald ruler of the Frankish kingdom, faced a harsh choice between honor and reality. He could summon his army from distant fiefdoms, fight a major battle, and possibly lose to these fearless warriors, leading to the destruction of his capital. Or he could do what no king wanted to do, bow his head and pay for temporary peace. He chose the second option, a decision that would set a precedent for many other kingdoms. An enormous ransom to 7,000 pounds of silver, equivalent to nearly 2,600 kilograms of pure silver. An unimaginable fortune at the time, enough to build several great cathedrals, was given to the Vikings. They took the silver, loaded it onto their longships, and silently sailed back down the river to the sea, leaving behind a humiliated capital, a king powerless before his subjects, and a harsh lesson. Fear could be turned into gold, and that gold only encouraged the enemy to return. From then on, the Vikings turned fear into a cunning business model. For decades after, they repeatedly returned to France, England, and other regions, demanding ever larger payments of Danegeld, sometimes amounting to tens of thousands of pounds of silver. European kings, from Alfred the Great in England to the Frankish kings, were forced to open their royal treasuries, hoping to buy some temporary peace by heavily taxing their people. But every piece of silver only made the Vikings greedier, more audacious. They knew that Europe was not only rich in gold and silver, but also weak in organization, with fragmented kingdoms and slow-moving armies. But the Vikings' ambitions did not stop at the cold northern shores or the rivers of Western Europe. They were not just local pirates, were the greatest mariners of their age, men who yearned to conquer the known world with voyages spanning thousands of miles. They sailed south past the treacherous Strait of Gibraltar, where the Mediterranean waves gave way to a deep blue, warm sea, but one full of danger from Muslim pirates. They attacked Muslim cities in Spain and Portugal, where rich markets were filled with gold, silk, spices, and slaves from Africa. They plundered cities in the south of France and Italy, where ancient Roman churches and villas became easy prey for their axes. Saga tales tell of them sailing as far as Pisa and even Rome, where wealthy citizens watched in horror as dragon ships glided through canals or up the Tiber River, bringing fire and destruction. Nowhere was safe. From the remote monasteries on the Scottish Isles, with their skin-cutting winds, to the prosperous cities of the Mediterranean, with their warm sun and olive groves, the place had water, sea, river, or even a lake, and had wealth. The Vikings would find it, regardless of distance or danger. They didn't just go west and south. Another branch of Vikings, Swedes known as the Varangians, turned their gaze eastward, opening a completely different direction of conquest. They didn't just rely on longships at sea. They carried them on their shoulders through dense forests, dragging them across the desolate lands of ancient Russia. They followed the great rivers like the Dnieper and the Volga down to the Black and Caspian seas, and knocked on the door of one of the greatest cities in the world at that time. Constantinople, the magnificent capital of the Byzantine Empire, with its towering Theodosian walls and treasures accumulated since Roman times. Imagine the scene. Viking warriors with their axes and round shields, standing before the magnificent golden walls of Constantinople, the city known as the Queen of Cities. They were not just pirates, they were explorers who dared to dream big, to challenge even the mightiest empires, and even became the mercenary Varangian Guard for the Byzantine Emperor, protecting his throne with Norse strength. From the Arctic Ocean with its eternal ice to North Africa with its hot deserts, from the icy rivers of Russia to the sun-drenched Mediterranean islands like Sicily, the Vikings drew a map of destruction and conquest. An unofficial empire without borders, connected by dragon ships and boundless ambition. Let's pause for a moment and put ourselves in that era. You are a monk, praying in the flickering candlelight of a riverside monastery. You are a farmer, working by the river every day with a gnawing anxiety. You are a craftsman, living in a small village, believing that your church and your king will protect you from evil forces. But every morning, as the sun rises, you look to the horizon with a wordless fear, knowing that at any moment, dragon ships could appear, bringing fire, blood, and destruction. There is no warning from the watchman, no chance for women and children to flee. What would it be like to live in that constant insecurity? Would it make you doubt your faith? Doubt the leaders who promised to protect you but failed? Would it make you see the world as a place of only blood and fire, where God seems silent before the northern fury? Leave your thoughts in the comments. A like and a subscribe will be a small flame, showing that you are following the trail of the dragon ships with me. The Vikings seemed to be only destroyers, sea wolves who knew only plunder and slaughter. But is that the whole story? Or behind the axe and the flame, was there another hand? A hand that knew how to build, how to create from the ashes. In the next part, we will explore a different face of the Vikings, not just as warriors, but as pioneers, who left their mark not only with blood, but with cities, trade routes, and a legacy that has lasted for centuries. Raiders or pioneers, the dual legacy of the Vikings. In the previous part, we stood amidst a trembling Europe, where dragon ships spread terror from the shores of England to the capital of Paris, from the rivers of Russia to the splendid cities of the Mediterranean. We painted a map of destruction, where the Vikings were sea wolves, relentless raiders, bringing blood and fire wherever they went. That image of savage warriors with battle axes and flames has been deeply etched into our minds by Christian chronicles. They seem to be only destroyers, phantoms from the north who knew only plunder, slaughter, and chaos. But is that the whole story, or just a biased perspective from the victims? Were the Vikings merely Europe's nightmare, or was there another story behind the axe and the flame? A story of a people who not only destroyed but also created, who not only brought death, but also sowed the seeds of civilization? Tonight, we will do something difficult. Look straight into the eyes of history's monster and find the human within. Because the Vikings did not only come with swords and axes, they also brought plows, seeds, dreams of settlement, and a thirst to conquer not just lands but new, unknown horizons. They were not just raiders, they were explorers, the greatest pioneers of their age, who drew the first lines on our world map, expanding the boundaries of humanity. Join me as we leave the blood-soaked shores of Europe and sail west into a vast, unknown ocean of fierce waves, skin-cutting winds, and the uncertainty of fate. This is not a voyage of attack for plunder. This is a voyage of discovery, a journey to find a new life, to escape the barren, icy, and overpopulated lands of Scandinavia. While some Vikings sailed in the summer to raid Europe, others, often free Carl families or younger sons with no land to inherit, sought something more precious than gold: fertile land to farm. They wanted a place to put down deep roots, to build sturdy wooden houses, to raise families with livestock and crops, and to forge a future independent of the fierce competition back home. And on that journey, they did things that no one thought savages could do: build democratic societies, discover new continents, and integrate into other civilizations. Imagine a longship gliding through the ferocious waves of the North Atlantic, storms that could capsize it at any moment. On deck are not only male warriors but also women and children, carrying not just axes and shields but also barley seeds, farming tools, and even sheep, cattle, and horses. They were not seeking quick spoils. They were seeking a new homeland, a place to live freely under their own laws. They found uninhabited islands of howling winds and black basalt rock, and there they built from nothing. One of their greatest achievements was Iceland, discovered around 870 by Nadad and later settled by Arnarson. They turned this volcanic and icy land into a prosperous community with sheep and fish farms. More importantly, they established the Althing in 930, one of the oldest parliamentary democracies in human history, where chieftains gathered annually at Thingvellir to debate laws, settle disputes, and make community decisions without a despotic king. Imagine warriors who once roared in a berserker frenzy now sitting around outdoor fires, debating land rights, marriage, and justice, according to Norse democratic traditions. From Iceland, a legendary explorer, Eric the Red, went even further. Exiled from Iceland for murder and a tribal dispute, he did not turn back in despair. Instead, he sailed west around 982 into a cold and unknown ocean of ice floes and fog. There he found a giant island covered in permanent ice, but with green valleys along the coast. In a stroke of marketing genius to attract others to leave their harsh lives back home, he named it Greenland, even though it was mostly ice. The settlements there survived for centuries, with farming, ranching, and trade with Europe. And then, Eric's son, Leif Erikson, pushed the boundaries of exploration even further, becoming one of history's greatest explorers. Around the year 1000, he led a fleet across the fierce waves of the Atlantic to a new land with lush meadows, vast forests full of valuable timber and wild grapes growing everywhere. A stark contrast to barren Scandinavia. He called it Vinland. Today we know this is Newfoundland in North America, confirmed by archaeological sites like Lonso Meadows. Pause to let that sink in. 500 years before Christopher Columbus discovered America in 1492, the Vikings were already there, building houses and exploring, although their settlements ultimately failed due to conflicts with natives in a harsh climate. But the transformation of the Vikings didn't just happen on remote Atlantic islands. It happened right in the heart of Europe, where they had once so brutally sown blood and fire. Let's return to France, where dragon ships had repeatedly sailed up the Seine to besiege Paris. A legendary Viking leader, Rollo, didn't just come to raid and leave. He stayed, leading his army of Norwegians and Danes to cause endless trouble for the Frankish kingdom for years. From plundering to besieging cities. Finally, King Charles, the simple, helpless against the Vikings' cruelty and persistence, made a historic decision that would change the map of Europe. The Treaty of St. Clair-Serpt in 911. Instead of continuing an unwinnable war, he negotiated peace. He granted Rollo and his men a vast territory in northern France along the Seine River. On one condition, they must convert to Christianity, swear allegiance to the Frankish kingdom, protect it from other Viking attacks from Scandinavia. Rollo agreed, was baptized, and became the first duke of that land, which came to be called the Land of the Northmen, Normandy. The Viking warriors took off their berserker armor, laid down their axes, and became farmers, merchants, and feudal dukes. They learned to speak Old French, built strong stone castles in the European style, and integrated into the Christian world they had once so brutally challenged. They brought their maritime and fighting skills, but also learned local agriculture and law, creating a hybrid people. The Normans. And then, just a few generations later, a descendant of Rollo, William the Conqueror, Duke of Normandy, achieved a feat that changed the history of England. In 1066, he led a Norman army across the English Channel, defeated the Anglo-Saxon king Harold Godwinson at the legendary Battle of Hastings, and became the King of England. William brought the Norman feudal system, built the Tower of London, and shaped modern England. From its language to its laws, they didn't just steal the crowns of kings. They created new kings, new empires from their own ashes. Do you feel the incredible irony of history? The descendants of those who had spread terror in Lindisfarne, who were called pagan savages, now sat on the thrones of the kingdoms their ancestors had plundered. They were not just warriors. They were the architects of empires, from Normandy to England. But the legacy of the Vikings does not end with the lands they settled and conquered. They were also skilled traders, creating trade routes that connected the Muslim world with Christian Europe. Through the rivers of Russia, they brought silk from Constantinople, Arab silver from Baghdad, and Indian spices from distant lands to the north, exchanging them for slaves, furs, and amber. They were master craftsmen, leaving behind exquisite wood carvings at Oseberg, complex silver jewelry, and rune stones that tell their heroic stories, like giant monuments in Sweden. They have a dual legacy: blood and fire on one side, but also the seeds of civilization, trade, democracy, and a new order on the other. They were both brutal destroyers and creative pioneers, spreading terror while also building the foundations of the modern world. From Dublin to New York. Let's pause for a moment and reflect. How can a people be both brutal destroyers and great creators. Do destruction and creation always go hand in hand like two sides of a sharp sword? To build a new world, must we always destroy a part of the old one? And do these two faces, cruelty and creativity, lie deep within the nature of every person, every civilization, waiting to be awakened? Leave your thoughts in the comments. A like and a subscribe will be a small flame, showing that you are exploring the complex legacy of the Vikings with me. We have seen that they were not just warriors, but also explorers and builders. But why, after 300 years of dominating the seas and sowing both terror and seeds of civilization, did the nightmare of the Northmen fade away? In the next part, we will step into the twilight of the Norse warriors, where the dragon ships ceased their roar and their story merged into the river of history. Twilight of the Northern Warriors, the decline and eternal legacy. In the previous part, we confronted a great paradox of history. The Vikings, savage pirates, sea wolves who spread blood and fire, were also pioneers who drew the first lines on the world map, from Iceland to North America. They both destroyed European cities and built new civilizations like Normandy and Dublin. A dual legacy, complex, contradictory, and as brilliant as their own fire, reflecting human nature itself. For 300 years, from 793 to 1066, they were an unbeatable force. A storm from the north, sweeping across Europe, from the remote monasteries of Britain to the splendid capitals of the Mediterranean. From the rivers of Russia to the coasts of North Africa, their dragon ships were like sea monsters, carrying axes and flames, making the entire continent tremble in desperate prayer. A furor Normanorum, Libera, Nos, Domini, an appeal that echoed through churches, becoming a symbol of collective fear. But no storm lasts forever. Every fire, no matter how fiercely it burns, must eventually die down in the winds of time. Tonight we will stand under a brilliant red sunset, where the Norse warriors lay down their axes, where the dragon ships cease their roar upon the waves. We will learn why, after 3 centuries of dominating the seas, the Viking Age faded into darkness, leaving deep scars and eternal dreams in the flow of human history. The answer to their decline does not lie in a single bloody defeat or a dramatic, fateful moment. The decline of the Vikings was a slow, gradual process, like the sun slowly setting over the icy fjords of Scandinavia. It came from both without the adaptation of their enemies, and within their own transformation, from society to soul. Let's start with the change from the outside. Europe learned to fight back, transforming from victim to predator. Imagine you are a wolf, hunting in a field full of untended lambs. For the first few years, hunting is easy. Undefended monasteries like Lindisfarne, riverside villages without walls, cities that never expected your axe from the sea or river. But then those sheep start building sturdy stone fences, training fierce sheepdogs ready to tear at the predator. Suddenly, the hunt is no longer an easy game. It becomes a higher-risk gamble. This is precisely what happened in Europe after decades of suffering. After devastating raids and humiliating Danegeld payments, kings and lords began to adapt decisively. They built stone castles in strategic locations, along coasts, rivers, and on high ground. Like Alfred, the Great Sburgal system in England, with over 30 fortified strongholds to counter raids. Monasteries that were once soft targets were now surrounded by thick walls, deep moats, and professional guards instead of just praying monks. Small villages became community fortresses, with watchtowers scanning the horizon to spot Viking ships from afar. The European feudal system, once slow and fragmented due to divided territories, now became more cohesive through military reforms. Kings established standing armies, ready to respond in days instead of weeks, with signaling systems using fire or fast horses. Heavy cavalry, with full-plate armor and powerful war horses, were trained to confront Viking warriors directly, as in the Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066. where King Harald Hardrada of Norway was defeated. The hit-and-run tactic, which relied on surprise and the enemy's weakness, began to lose its effectiveness. As Europe built a defensive network, each raid now carried greater risk of being surrounded, pursued, and loot became harder to acquire, leading many Vikings to stay home rather than take the risk. Imagine a Viking warrior, once accustomed to easy plunder at Lindisfarne, now standing before a formidable stone castle like Dover Castle. With archers on the walls firing a rain of arrows and knights waiting at the gate, the fire in his axe still burned, but the prey was no longer easy. It had grown fangs and claws. But the external change is only part of the story. The greatest enemy of the Vikings in the end was not the stone castles or the increasingly powerful European armies. Their greatest enemy was themselves, an internal transformation from society to belief. Let's return to Scandinavia, the land of icy fjords and deep forests, where free warriors once lived like petty kings in their own wooden longhouses. Throughout the early Viking Age, Scandinavia was a land of independent tribes, warring jarls and free-carl warriors where any man could pick up an axe and sail for personal glory. But by the 11th century, that land began to change profoundly, shifting from fragmentation to centralization. Unified kingdoms emerged, bringing order and stability. In Norway, Harald Hardrada united the tribes under his banner through war and diplomacy, building a powerful kingdom. In Denmark, Harald Bluetooth built a mighty kingdom with formidable fortresses like Trelleborg and a tight taxation system to fund his army. In Sweden, new kings arose, bringing written laws and centralized administration. The free warriors of old now became subjects, required to obey the king's orders instead of pursuing personal raids. These kings did not want sporadic, risky raids that could lead to war with Europe. They wanted stability to develop trade, diplomacy, and the domestic economy. They wanted the longships to stay in port, to carry goods instead of warriors, transforming Scandinavia from a land of raiders into a center of North European trade. But the most profound change was not political or economic. It was a change of soul, of worldview. Through centuries of trade, settlement, and war with Christian Europe, a new religion slowly but irreversibly crept into the land of Odin and Thor, Christianity. With its promise of a heaven of peace, forgiveness, and salvation, it gradually replaced the belligerent polytheistic worldview of the Vikings. No more Valhalla with its eternal combat and endless feasts. No more Valkyries carrying souls to Odin's golden hall. Instead, there was a new promise, a heaven where humility, compassion, and forgiveness were the highest virtues, where war was a sin rather than a path to glory. Christianity didn't just change faith, it changed how the Vikings viewed war and life. Killing became a grave sin, no longer a feat to be praised in skaldic poems. Raiding was no longer a rite of passage to reach Valhalla. It was condemned as an immoral act. A Viking warrior, who once dreamed of dying on the battlefield to be received by Odin, now knelt in a newly built wooden church, praying for the salvation of his soul under the gaze of Jesus Christ and Saint Olaf, a Norwegian saint who was once a Viking but converted. As the belief in Valhalla faded, their axes no longer swung as freely. The berserker rage in their hearts slowly died down, replaced by a new worldview where war was not a destiny woven by the Norns, but something to be avoided to achieve salvation. This conversion was pushed by kings like Olaf Tryggvason of Norway, who used both force and persuasion to spread Christianity. Europe learned to defend itself robustly. The Vikings forgot how to attack ruthlessly, turning towards peace and integration. The Viking Age ended in the 11th century, not with a single great battle, but with the slow fading of an era. But their legacy did not vanish like smoke. It still flows in the veins of history, in the cities they built, the trade routes they opened, and the stories we still tell today. They left behind Dublin, a city born from riverside longforts, now a center of Irish culture. They left behind Normandy, where Viking warriors became dukes and kings, shaping modern England through William the Conqueror. They left Norse words in the English language, sky, window, knife, like indelible linguistic traces. And perhaps, in the blood of Europeans today, there are still strands of blonde hair, sharp-eyed gazes, carrying the memory of the brave northern warriors. The nightmare was over. But the dreams of exploration, the scars from fire and axe they left behind, remain forever etched in human history, reminding us of the power of change. Our journey, which began with the fire that blazed on the sacred island of Lindisfarne in 793, has come to an end after 6 long parts. We have seen that the Vikings were not just the devils of the north from European prayers. They were explorers who dared to cross oceans, merchants who connected the world, pioneers who rewrote the map, and creators of a complex legacy. And now, I leave you with one final question. When history calls a people savage, is that an objective truth? Or is it just the biased perspective of those who trembled before their axe, the historians from the winning side? Are brutality and creativity two sides of the same flame, burning eternally in the heart of humanity, waiting to be awakened in every age? Leave your final thoughts in the comments. A like and a subscribe will be a small flame, showing that you have journeyed with me from the first fire at Lindisfarne to the final sunset in Scandinavia. Thank you for staying awake with Sleepless Mind on this journey into one of the most violent, complex, and vibrant eras of history. Your patience, reflection, and interaction are an invaluable inspiration to continue. If these stories moved you, please leave a mark. And we will continue together in the long nights ahead, exploring other secrets of the past. The night is very late, but before you fall asleep, remember the greatest lesson the Vikings left behind. History is never black and white. It is always a complex gray where nightmares and great dreams intertwine, creating the story of who we are today. Sleep well, and may you dream of dragon ships gliding on the waves.
You've crossed the story. You felt every pulse in the dark, and I was there with you, quietly, always. That's why I left behind one last thing. Not to explain, not to impress, just to stay with you a little longer. A song I chose with care, as if tucking you in from across time and space. So go on, lay back, the music knows where to take you. still here, then you're something rare. Not many stay this long. So, thank you for choosing to stay. I'm here too, still awake, surrounded by the quiet glow of my editing screen, shaping the next stories just for you. If there's anything you want to leave behind, a whisper, a suggestion, even just a symbol, drop it in the comments. Because maybe, tomorrow night, you'll hear yourself echoed in a story that's never been told before. Still here, even now? I have a feeling part of you is still wandering somewhere between wakefulness and dreaming. I know that feeling well because I'm still awake with you. In a quiet room, I'm gently laying out layers of sound. Each breath, each beat, preparing the next journey we'll take together. If you're still listening, leave me a sign. Let me know how you're feeling, or just where you are in this vast world. Because right now, in this stillness, you are not alone. You're still there, aren't you? I can't see you, but I can feel you. Like a soft signal pulsing across the silence. Over here, I'm still working, refining layers of sound, rewriting fragments of voice, building the landscape for our next adventure. One that you might inspire. If an idea comes to you, share it with me. Comment below. A theme, a memory, a strange dream. I read every word because I never tell these stories alone. I tell them with you.